Ireland's rising star Alex Dunne set a proper statement this past F2 weekend, showing both his best and worst side across the two races to really make clear that his early step up to F2 was the right call to make. Hello and welcome, fellow motorsports fans. Not only did we finally have the first F2 feature race of the season, Freddie Slater also finally had a chance to convince the wider audience of what we already knew about his talent, along with a ton of other stories playing out across 9 different single-seater series last weekend. So let's dive straight in. We'll get to the big stories in a minute, but the Central European Zone F4 has also started, so I do want to give you guys a very brief overview of that as well. Just keep in mind that the Genta army, which dominated the field, will not complete in full force over the entire season. Most of the big names apparently were only here for some Red Bull Ring track time. Bart Harrison was without a doubt the star of the grid, and quite expectedly so, dominating 2 races and securing another podium on top. Max Caron doing well isn't a surprise either considering last season, but I was quite glad to see Gino Trapper and Javier Herrera as such consistent members of the lead group as well. Then we had 2 drivers outside of the Genta army who also impressed considerably. First of all, Luca Visoriano. If you've listened to my F4 content last season, you may know that he is a bit of a favorite of mine, competing with the Romanian real racing outfit and also consistently scrapping at the front, including his maiden win in the last race. And second, Danish karting graduate David Walter. We've talked about him over the winter, and he once again delivered at least 1 podium here, despite racing for the rather outgunned Maffei squad. I'll avoid a proper losers list, but I do have some question marks around Mathilde Patz. The German is racing under her own team in this series, and I suppose if this was actually a fully independent operation, it wasn't all that bad. It just begs the question, why? Some glimpses of potential were shown, but this is the sort of grid where a better female driver could really get her name out there by fighting for wins, and at the moment that hardly seems realistic for Patz. In F3, Rafa Kamara dominance prevailed despite a stall in the sprint, and we also had an excellent run from Callum Boysen across both races to really insert himself in the title conversation, as expected before the season. Together with Tuukka Taponen and Nikola Zolov getting a bit closer to the sort of form I expected going into this, these 4 now looked set for an epic title showdown, provided anyone finds an answer to Kamara's clinical feature races, that is. Of course, fast Freddie Slater was the real title story, with an absurd debut in the sprint, fighting for the win in the, by all accounts, not so great AIX car. Sadly, mechanical issues robbed us of a chance to watch his final. Nevertheless, I've said it in the past and I will double down here, he is easily the greatest not yet signed driver anywhere on the ladder and will presumably be in F1 as soon as his age allows. To highlight one of round 1's losers who came back big time, Christian Ho was considerably better and really got everything out of the Dams machine to score some good points. The team may look outgunned, but at least in my opinion, he still made a statement here. On the flip side, Charlie Wirtz is still a bit disappointing all around. Not to say he's bad or anything, but for a returning driver, you'd expect the tyre management game to be less of an issue. Instead, he handled it the worst out of all the Trident trio to even fall entirely out of the points in the feature. Certainly not a look you can bring if you want to be in the title conversation. Shout out to MP as a whole for a great weekend across the board. All 3 drivers in the top 10 in the feature, with Tim Tramnitz leading the way. He showed that aforementioned management skill down to perfection to take that podium. But more importantly, rookies Alessandro Giusti and Bruno Del Pino were about as closely matched as I expected. This trio will remain exciting to watch all year long, I reckon, and I'd love to see Tramnitz keep himself in the title conversation. It certainly looks more than possible at the moment. The biggest F2 story for me was clearly Irish rising star Alex Dunne's maiden victory in the class and his first win since 2023 all around, during a weekend where he really showed both the best and the worst he's got to offer. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to be mean when I say his worst. His worst is clearly still pretty damn good. Nevertheless, his very scrappy nature did end up costing him vital points in the sprint, something you cannot really afford too much if you've got any title ambition, but he more than made up for it with utter domination in the feature. This cannot be overstated. He didn't just win the feature, he completely blew his opposition out of the water, leaving zero chance for the likes of Browning or Fornaroli. The only caveat is of course the lack of a real teammate to compare him to. I really wish we had Christian Mansell there and not Amaury Cordeel, but at least given recent history, there is nothing to suggest that he has some sort of huge car advantage, so I will give him the benefit of the doubt there. The high-tech inter-team battle remained excellent, with Luke Browning getting the better of Dino Beganovic over the weekend. During my F2 predictions, I did ask the question whether there is a lack of raw pace that could be exposed for Browning, and he has so far answered this question with a very loud no. Add to that his rather mature approach to the tactical side of racing, and he may just be a proper title contender. Victor Martin did salvage decent points on Sunday after getting shoved off in the sprint. He looks great, especially compared to depressingly poor Rito Mamiata, but he really needs to keep his nose clean for a title bid. Sure, the sprint race lap 1 moment wasn't directly his fault, but he might need to get better at general risk assessment. Own fault or not, he cannot keep losing points like this. Pepe Marti turned out to be the surprise star of both the sprint and to a lesser extent the feature as well. He really seems to love this particular track. I don't really see him as a title contender, but he'll definitely put his name out there with these sorts of weekends. While Red Bull will of course prioritize Lindblad, and understandably so, I hope Marti will give them a proper headache. I may have underestimated Leonardo Fornaroli. He still doesn't look like a proper winner, but at this point we really have to appreciate his remarkable consistency straight out the gate, continuing like he's still an F3. Still can't quite imagine him as a champion, wait for this to age like milk by the way, but I'd expect him to hang around the title contenders for quite a while unless he gets mecha-chromed or something. Lots more performances worth talking about like Joshua Dirksen, Richard Verschoor, or surprisingly so, even Rafael Villa-Gomez, but I think we've covered about the most interesting cases for now. Instead, let's have a very brief look at F1. Really, I mainly want to point out what a great race it was across the board, both strategically and on track. Really the reverse Suzuka all around. Did Norris mess up a little bit by not taking P2? Sure, but at the same time Russell did an incredible job all weekend to be where he was. The storyline I want to focus on for a moment is the progression of the big rookie class and how I view them at the moment. Kimi Antonelli, Ollie Behrman and Isaac Hadjar, Melbourne error notwithstanding, were all performing as well as expected, with Kimi in particular shining not with raw pace, but with a thus far pretty flawless season all around. Sure, I was low-key hoping he would have a chance against Russell in Bahrain, but I guess we'll have to wait for the European tracks with that. Jack Doohan may take a little longer to get fully up to speed, but he has also looked a lot better here, and I think if Alpine remains patient, he will soon be a valuable asset to the team as well. Liam Lawson and his struggles have of course been discussed a lot, but I find the Gabriel Bortoleto situation a lot more interesting. He is pretty much a big question mark at this point, the same issue Zhou had over his 3-year stint, to be honest. It is so difficult to look good when your car is absolutely nowhere, so I don't think he should get any blame, but F1 is cruel and typically being anonymous isn't exactly a great way to foster a long career, so I really hope Sauber get their shit together at least a few more times this year to give him some time in the spotlight. Feel free to drop your opinions about that in the comments as well, while we now move over to North America. Formula E returned to Homestead, Miami to deliver a race which unfortunately was mostly decided in the steward's office and not on the actual racetrack, showcasing some rather big flaws within the current set of regulations if you ask me. The quick summary for those that missed it: it was a classic peloton-style race with most drivers saving a long second attack mode for late in the race. Sad face was just about to kick off as Antonio Felix da Costa started pushing with his attack mode out front when a crash between Maxi Günther, Jake Hughes and Mitch Evans brought out a red flag after costing a couple of laps. This put half the grid in a horrible situation. Da Costa, because he lost his 6 minutes of attack mode, and the likes of Nato, Frines, Mortara, the McLaren duo and many more, because they simply lacked the time to use up all of their attack mode before the checkered flag, resulting in devastating penalties. In my opinion, this needs to be looked at from a rules point of view. Maybe remove the attack mode requirements if a red flag occurred or something. I don't know, I don't make the rules, because that really wasn't a good way to end a professional motor race. But here's where I very much welcome your opinions down below as well. Instead, let's focus on the actual things we can take away from this race. First of all, Porsche back to fight, this time with Pascal Wehrlein finally in the mix again. Sure, the win required the aforementioned chaos, but he had a pretty good shot at the podium anyway. And Da Costa looks like the driver he was in the second half of the year, so absolutely brilliant. Also a much deserved shout out for veteran Lucas di Grassi making it to the podium, and actually without much luck involved, he was quick all day long. Unfortunately, the same really cannot be said about his rookie teammate Zane Maloney. Maloney still has not really figured out this whole Formula E thing properly by the looks of it. Although I'll accept that maybe his entire plan got ruined by the interruption as well, we just don't really know that. And while Taylor Barnett didn't have the greatest day, even without the penalty, I do want to highlight David Beckman. Yes, he ruined his race during a brief disagreement with the local walls, but he was very quick all weekend from quali to the race and also managed the peloton rather well, while Dan Ticktum was stuck at the back and only scored thanks to the absurd amounts of penalties ahead. So I'd say, all in all, this weekend was a success for Beckman. But now he really needs to start converting this potential into points sooner rather than later. Now, onto the road to Indy, where the USF Juniors finally started their season at NOLA, so let me quickly try to paint a picture of the power dynamics at play here. The highest placed returning drivers, João Vergara and Leonardo Scorpioni, naturally did rather well, especially as Scorpioni was probably the single best driver this weekend, and it would have been reflected in the standings if not for an off-screen wreck from the lead in the final race. But of course, the main interest in these lowest categories always has to be the young debutants, and we've had quite a few of those here. Oliver Wheldon almost matched his brother's success from last season. Sure, no win to his name just yet, but a consistent and clean front runner with 3 podium appearances is still pretty banging. 14-year-old karting star Ty Fisher also took to the car like a duck, or should I say like a fish to water, and was firmly established in the front runner groups as well. And last but not least, Liam Loyakono also impressed a fair bit, struggling a bit on the opening laps, but overall his pace was great, so we'll surely see more from the Aussie as well. I'll talk more about the midfield and future front runners as the season goes on, but I do want to shout out Rodrigo Gonzalez. The Gonzalez brothers were both pretty forgettable last season, and while Patricio still has some obvious issues, Rodrigo looked vastly improved, and I reckon he'll be fighting for podiums, if not wins, when D-Force has a good weekend as a squad. In USF 2000s, there really only was one story dominating the headlines. Liam McNeilly continuing the trend from St. Pete by utterly blitzing the field in all 3 of the races, not just taking the hat-trick, but doing so in insanely dominant fashion. It is still early in the year, but it already looks increasingly difficult to imagine anyone but him as the eventual champion. Further proof of concept for GB4 if you ask me. The other podium spots were a little more interesting without the huge amounts of wrecks from the opening round though. Thomas Schrag looked a lot more like the late season form he presented in 2024, on the podium in all 3 races and usually able to get into some sort of small breakaway group as well. Very impressive all around. His competitors varied between Jack Jeffers, Evan Cooley and G3 Adjuras. The trio not quite coming up with the same consistency, but clearly all formed the upper midfield this weekend. Karting graduates Sebastian Gazone and Khalib Ghaffar couldn't quite replicate the same success from the first round, but were still also firmly part of the competent half of the grid. Garzone in particular having to get quite a few overtakes done over the weekend to prove that point. Either way, the lower half of the grid may be a little bit dodgy, but there is quite a bit of talent in the top 10-ish or so on this screen. The picture remained pretty clear in the USF Pro 2000s as well, with Alessandro Di Tullio and Max Garcia clearly the leaders, fighting for the win in their own little breakaway in every single race so far, very much matching our expectations. The small chase group is far more interesting to predict, with changing combinations of Max Taylor, Jacob Douglas, Michael Costello and Ariel Alkin fighting it out for P3. I personally hope Max Taylor will close the gap to the leaders a little bit and maybe even join the title fight, but at this point there's no real indication that that'll happen anytime soon. Costello is very much like the last season, showing potential but lacking this consistency to do so every single race. Douglas is highly impressive considering he clearly doesn't have a lot of budget to work with, and with barely any seat time last season, I could also see him take the fight to the leaders at a later point in the season. With all three Pabst Racing drivers in the top 6, I think the question about the best team in the series will have a rather familiar sounding answer. If you paid close attention to the table, you might notice two odd names out I haven't mentioned yet: Matt Clark and Jace Denmark. Both in the same points bracket so far, but on two very different trajectories. After a successful opening round, Matt Clark has gone back to the frustrating to watch mad unlucky driver he's been over the last season, unable to convert more than one of his decent grid positions here. Denmark is essentially the opposite, very steady and consistent, but so far has just lacked the raw pace to go with the aforementioned chase pack, and usually found himself leading the deeper midfield proper. If he can keep up this form, he might earn himself a decent championship position with that consistency, but unfortunately it isn't exactly the most promising look when thinking about the next step up the ladder. I'll keep the IndyCar segment short, but I do have to highlight this outstanding drive by Kyle Kirkwood, not just to win the race, but doing so under consistent pressure from the mastermind that is Alex Palou. And you pretty much beat him at his own game here as well, working around the strategy to perfection to keep track position lights to flag. I was watching the race with a Swede, so a Rosenqvist podium would have been the cherry on top, but oh well, we can't have it all, I suppose. And of course, I do need to shout out the two drivers who had by far the best weekend of their careers so far: Kiffin Simpson and Stingray Robb. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think they, Rob in particular, will magically turn their careers around, but at least they finally got to showcase that they've got some sort of wheel ability. In Simpson's case in particular, I have not fully given up on him yet, given the fact he's been pretty proficient in sports cars whenever I've seen him over in that world. I think there's a lesson in there about the modern pay driver. Sure, you can still buy your way into a series you wouldn't be in on merit alone, but the path to get close to that still requires so much skill that the pay drivers we end up getting on the highest level are still pretty much professional racing drivers in ability, just maybe not ultra elite ones. Lance Stroll, of course, being another good example of that. Either way, it's been a lot, but it wouldn't be Race Week Review without our very quick weekly karting report. I'll keep the karting segment as short as possible, but I couldn't just ignore the Champions of the Future Academies round. We'll only look at the seniors because not only did Chiara Batic continue her excellent form from last weekend, this time the category was seemingly 50% women in the top 10. Quite the sight when looking at the future of women in motorsport. And since we haven't really talked about most of them here yet, here are the girls you should know about. Klara Kowalczyk sharing a podium with Batic on Sunday, Ella Häkkinen, yes, that Häkkinen, and also a podium contender multiple times already in Gabby Texera. Front runner during the first round already, and really came in huge here with back-to-back charging drives on both Saturday and Sunday, overtaking drivers left, right and centre throughout the races. Honestly, while my excitement for Batic remains high, of course, in some way she impressed the most of the lot. Wow, this was the first marathon episode of the year, and there will be a lot more of those over the summer, so I'll leave it at that for now. Next week, we'll get the season opener of French F4, along with all the other action, of course, so you can look forward to that. For now, it is your time to drop all of your thoughts and opinions down in the comments so we can get our lovely little discussion going. And otherwise, I just thank you all for watching, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.